With that, welcome to the second of our webinar series. This one is on setting up your ranch. My name is Cannon Smith. I'm one of the creators of Herdly. We are expecting this to take approximately an hour, hour and a half at the most, depending how quickly we go through and what kinds of questions we have. The webinar that we did a couple of weeks ago is more of a general introduction to Herdly. And so this webinar is assuming that you already know about Herdly, possibly have downloaded it, installed it, and created a ranch, and you're ready to set your own ranch up. We will be having some more webinars in the future as well, which go into more details and other aspects of Herdly. Today, this is the agenda we are hoping to cover. I'll show you how to create a Herdly ranch account. Then we'll go through all of the ranch settings that are in the ranch settings window. I'll show you how to add users and the importance of doing that. Then we'll go through locations, contacts, products, drugs, and groups. After that, we'll enter a few cows so you can see what that looks like. Then I'll finish up showing you where you can get more information, and then we'll handle any questions that haven't been answered in the meantime. So with that, let's get started. Let me just switch over to my main screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my main screen. In my dock, I've already installed Herdly, so I'll just launch that to get started. But we'll be beginning as if this is the first time I launched Herdly. So when you launch Herdly, you'll get a screen that looks something like this. Typically, if you already have created a Herdly ranch account somewhere else, you'll choose the first option and enter your credentials, and then your ranch will be downloaded to the device that you have. It is also possible to see a demo ranch, which was covered in our previous webinar. In this case, I'm going to select the middle option because I've never created a Herdly account for this particular ranch, and I want to do that. So I'll choose that and click Continue. And then I'm presented with a screen where I can enter in the information I need to about my ranch. So we're going to call this Webinar Cattle. We'll enter in some address information, keep it fairly simple. We'll go with Etna, Cardston, Alberta. We'll enter in a zip code and a phone number. Now, the phone number and the email address are particularly important. And the reason why, I'm just going to enter in a fake one for now. The reason these are important is because if you ever forget how to get into Herdly, you lose your password, or perhaps even you lose your phone and you still don't have your password and you get a new phone and you aren't able to get in, you can contact us, and it's possible for us to give you a temporary code which will get you back in and allow you to download your data. But we want to verify that you are who you say you are. And the way we can do that is with your phone number or email address. So these need to be accurate and kept up to date in the future. Then part of the creation process includes setting up an admin account. So I'm going to just type in my name for a username. I'm going to type in a password. The password I'm typing in is a little bit lengthy, and I just want to spend a moment on passwords. Somehow over the years, we've got the impression that a password that has a few extra characters, like a $sign or a number sign in it, makes a password more safe. That's actually not really that true. The best password is simply a longer password, and it's completely fine to use words for that, memorable words, as long as they're just a little bit random. And the example I gave here, I typed in fire, sink, gravel, tree. And that's actually extremely secure, and yet it's something that I could probably remember. Now I have to type it in again here. Hopefully I can do that the same both times. Now, if somebody told you about Herdly, someone who's already using Herdly, and they gave you their referral code, you could enter this referral code in here. And if you did that, once you made your first payment, both you and the person that you referred you to Herdly would both get an extra month's free. And so it's a great little incentive to try and share Herdly with other people. I don't have a referral code, so I'm just going to click and say I have read and accept the license agreement. You can read the license agreement here if you like. And then I'm going to create my Herdly account by clicking this button here. So I do that, and now the Herdly account has been created. It knows it's brand new, and so Herdly opens up the ranch settings window. I'm actually going to close it so that I can show you how to get there in the future if you don't have that window open anyway. There's two ways to get that. You can go up to the menu underneath Setup and choose Ranch Settings, or in the dashboard you can also click Setup here and choose Ranch Settings here. So this is where we're going to spend a bit of time so that you can figure out how to do your ranch settings. The first thing I want to show you is that at the bottom left of this window, there is a number, which is your ranch ID. This is a really important number to have. You'll need that number sometimes if you communicate with us for tech support. It's also needed when you bring Herdly onto a new device, if you get a new phone or another computer, or a family member or employee wants to get Herdly on their device, they'll need the ranch ID as well as some other information in order to do that. And so keep this secure, but you probably want to write it down somewhere so you have it outside of Herdly as well. And in fact, because I know I'm going to need this later in the presentation, I'm going to write this number down for myself right now. If we go back to the dashboard and look in the title of the window, you'll see that the ranch ID is there as well. So you can get it in a few different places. I'm just going to go back to the ranch settings window. And on the left-hand side, we'll see each of the sections that we can go through. The first one is the ranch info, which is simply the information that we just typed. And so, for example, if your phone number changed in the future or your email address changed in the future, this is the place you could go to update these settings. Same with your ranch name. We're just going to walk down through each of these sections, and I'll explain each one as we go. The second one is the billing section. When you first download Herdly, you get 30 days free usage. You can see this has already been applied to our account that we just created. But after that, if you were to continue to use Herdly, you would need to add funds, which you do by clicking this button. This is a very secure way. The credit card information that's entered is not actually stored by us. We don't even have access to it. It's done in a special way that only communicates with your credit card company. So that works really well. Here, though, you can see a list of each transaction that happens. You can always go back and you can print receipts, you can enter coupon or referral codes, and more in the billing area. You can see your account balance up here, which for us is 0, but we could add funds to the account balance, and then that would draw down over time. And there's a bit of more information here as well. Let's go on to the preferences section, which will be, the rest of these will be a little more interesting. Here you can enter preferences that apply to your entire ranch. And so the preferred language, right now we only support English, so that's a pretty easy decision. We have the animal weight unit, temperature unit, and height unit. It's important to recognize that Herdly actually stores these values internally, always in kilograms, Celsius, centimeters, but it's quite happy to transform that into whatever makes sense for you. So I think most people in Canada, anyway, and probably the United States would use pounds. We could change that to pounds, and that's all you'd have to think in from then on. Temperature unit, maybe we want to change that to Fahrenheit, and that's completely fine. And animal height unit, change it to whatever you feel comfortable with, perhaps inches there. And that will apply to any of your devices where it's showing any of those kind of units. Breeding composition is an important concept that we'll come back to when we get into the breeds. So let's leave that for the moment, other than I will show you that you can round. These are your options, either the nearest percent or tenth, hundredth, or thousandth. So just kind of keep that tucked in the back of your mind for a moment. The final preference is the default calf tag. What happens is when a cow calves and you want to record that calving event, you will end up selecting the cow and then saying you want to create a new calf. And Herdley would like to try and create the calf's tag automatically if possible to save you from entering it. And there are a few different ways you can set that up. You can ask it to leave Herdley blank, in which case it won't try and do that. You'll just be able to type in whatever you want in Herdley. You can ask it to pre-pen the year letter. So for that example, or as an example, I've forgotten what the year is this year, but let's say it was G, just as an example. And if your cow was 301, then what it would do for the calf is it would say G301. And append year letter is very similar. It just puts a letter at the end. So again, if the cow was 301 and it was the year G, then the calf would automatically get 301G. Number of mothers tag, we'll just take the numeric portion of the numbers tag and give that to the calf. So if your cow was 484A, then the calf would just become 484. And the last option, same as mother's tag, just takes whatever's the mother's tag and gives the calf exactly the same tag. So these are just the defaults. Once that calf is created, you can still change the tag if you need to, but this can save quite a bit of timing, quite a bit of typing and time as you're in the field. Okay, let's go to the next section, which is the breed section. Let me just check to see if we have any questions that have come in yet. And it looks like we're doing good. Okay. So in the breeds section, we have a list of breeds. These breeds, for the most part, come from the National Association of Animal Breeders. And they've created internationally recognized abbreviations for each breed. There's quite a few of them here, and you're unlikely to use all of them. And to make entering breeds easier in different situations, we recommend that you select just the breeds that you plan on using. And so by default, they're all selected, but you could go through and you could deselect the ones you weren't interested in. Just want to show you a little shortcut here. If I were to hold down my Option on a Mac or Alt key on Windows while I clicked one of these, it's actually going to toggle the entire list. And so sometimes it's faster to deselect everything and then just go through and find the breed you're interested in. So maybe we do Angus and maybe Beefmaster, and let's go down and do the Canadian as well. And you could, if you have an animal that's in your herd that has any portion of one of these breeds, then it's a great idea to select those breeds so they can be used later on. In Herdley, there's the idea of a breed composition. As you know, most cattle aren't purebreds, most commercial animals anyway, a combination of several breeds. And so you can always type in any kind of breed you want when you're in Herdley, but most ranches are going to have a handful of breeds that are most common. And to make it easier to enter in those breeds, basically be able to just choose them from a list, you can create those here. So let's do that. Create a couple of examples. If we click the plus button, we come up with this screen, and we can create a breed composition by adding a breed. So I'm going to click the plus button again, and I get just the 3 breeds that we have selected over in this side of the screen. So let's say we do have some purebred Angus. So I can just type or choose Angus. We'll leave the percentage at 100 and click OK. And you'll see that our first breed composition is added. Now let's add another one. We'll click the plus button, and let's say that this time it's we have some that are 50% Angus, so I type in 50 there. And then I click the plus button again, and let's say it's 50% Beefmaster as well. So as long as our total is 100%, we should be good. Now, notice the notation down in the bottom left. This is how Herdley will display breed compositions in lists and in other places. And so, again, each breed has a 2, sometimes a 3-letter combination that's specific to that breed. So we could read this as Angus 50% and Beefmaster 50%. So we know that it's crossbred half and half. I'll click the OK button. And we could continue on adding these breed compositions. Now, notice that this is expecting, it's only showing 50 and no decimal places. And for most people, that's going to be fine. You know, if you could have an animal that was 25% one breed and 25% another and 50% another, or even like 13% and on from there. If you want to be more precise, that's where going back to this preference, the breed composition rounding, and you can say, I want to go to the nearest 10th or 100th or 1000th. If you were to do that, then when you were creating your breeds, you could be more precise and go like Angus 12.5% and go on from there. So that's just a little tip if you want to be more precise there. Okay, maybe it's helpful to see a bit of an example. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to save the ranch settings as they are now. We'll be coming back to it in a minute. Back in our dashboard, I'm going to click the Animals button in order to open up the animal list. We don't have any animals in here in our ranch yet, but if I click Actions and choose New Animal, that gives me a chance to enter an animal. Now I'm going to skip most of this information here because all I really want to do is show how we can enter a breed. So if I scroll down, oh, I think I went too far. There we go. I forgot where breed was. So I mentioned before that when you have some common breeds already entered in the settings window, you'll be able to just start typing them in here. So if I type A, you'll see automatically it brings up Angus. If I keep typing AN5, it knows we could go to the next one. So it's a pretty fast way of entering it. I can also hit my down arrow, and then I can choose between those two common breeds that we entered before. So that's just makes it really fast, especially on a mobile device. You can just choose the breed rather than trying to type something in. I could also click the ellipsis button to the side and always create a specific breed on the fly, similar to the way we were doing it in the ranch settings window. All right, I'm going to cancel out of that. I don't actually want to create that animal right now and close this window and go back into our ranch settings window. Now we were just in the breeds section, so let's move on to the colors section. Let me just check to see if there's any questions. Looks like we're still good there. Colors works similarly to breeds in that you can choose which of the colors that are available most closely match the ones on your ranch. Again, you can Option or Alt-click to toggle all of them and then just choose the ones you want. You can leave them all on if you want. Colors are a bit interesting with cattle. I don't think there's anyone who calls a color, especially a combination of colors on a cow, exactly the same as someone else. And so we have a list here that we feel is quite representative, and hope you can find something that's fairly close to what way you would call it in the future. Excuse me, on your ranch. So that's colors. Let's go on to drugs. Here we have a list of drugs. Now these drugs come from the North America Compendium of Veterinarian Products. We try and keep it up to date. If you ever see a drug that you can purchase that isn't on here, please let us know, and we'll make sure we get that change for the next version of Herdley that goes out. Again, the idea is the same. You can Option or Alt click to get rid of the drugs you want. Now, it's a little bit different here with drugs. What we recommend is that you choose the drugs that you use most often, but recognize that Hurdly will always allow you to enter any drug. So even if you have a drug that isn't checked in this list, there is a way to still enter that when you're vaccinating or entering a drug event for an animal. You just want to choose the ones that you're going to use most often so they don't get in your way. You'll notice also at the top that you can choose just the drugs from Canada or the ones from the United States or all of the drugs. If you'll remember, when I set this ranch up a few moments ago, I let it know I was in Canada. And so it automatically deselected all the ones from the United States and selected all of the ones from Canada. But you can make a change to that if you want. There is quite a long list of drugs, and so if you're looking for a specific one, you can use the search field at the top. And if I just start typing in the name of a drug, then I can get to it really quickly and check it or uncheck it as needed. Okay, so that's drugs. Let's move on to diagnoses. This is a list of possible diagnoses, and the same applies here. You can check or uncheck the ones you want. You kind of have a type to help you group them, and just choose the ones that you're most familiar with. And once again, if you're not familiar with one, but your vet comes out and he says, oh, you know, this calf has a particular diagnosis, if it's not something you have checked, you'll still actually be able to choose it. It just won't be on your short list to get to really quickly. Okay, so that's diagnoses. Let's go to brands. One moment. Now, when you have a chance to enter a brand for an animal, you'll actually be able to enter whatever you want. Brands are kind of a free-form field where you can enter any characters that you would like to. But of course, most ranches are dealing with one or just a handful of brands, and it'd be nice to be able to choose them from a list, especially, again, on a mobile device where typing isn't quite as much fun as on a keyboard. And so if you do have some common brands that you'd like to be in your list, always available when you're entering a brand, this would be the place to add it. And so let me just add a couple as an example. I'm going to click the plus button, and to the right I can enter in what I want. Maybe I'm going to do CS bar, and we're going to say that this one is on the right hip. And I'll create another one, and maybe I'll call this one Rafter WV, and we're going to say that this one is on the left shoulder. Now to show where that shows up, let me just save our settings where we're at. I'm going to reopen the animals list window, and once again choose actions and choose new animal. And if I come down here, and I should find brand somewhere. Maybe not. Oh yeah, there we go. So here's the brand field. And so if I just hit the down arrow, or if I were to click this button here, you can see that the two common brands are automatically there. So if I chose CS bar, once I tab out, not only does it put in CS bar here, but it remembers that right hip is associated with that brand. If I were to go back and start typing in Rafter WV, once I tab out, it recognizes that's the left shoulder. So that can save a lot of time when you do that. All right, let's cancel this again and go back into our ranch settings. And let's go to the default section. The default section is meant to help things go faster when you're entering in cattle out in the field. There's a couple of mechanisms in Herdly that make it possible for you to have a pre-filled default value in a field. And this is the root one of those. So for example, I'm going to skip calving year for a second. I'll come back to that. But for breed, let's choose half Angus, half Beefmaster. Let's say that most of your cows were this. And if you set it to this, then when you're creating new animals, if it can't find another default from some other mechanism, it's going to go back to this one. And of course, you can change it, but it makes it a little bit quicker if this is going to be the breed that's predominantly in your herd. There are other mechanisms I mentioned. For example, if you're entering in several cows in a row, if you change the breed for one, then it's going to remember that for the next one, as long as you're doing it all in order. And so it's assuming you're going to try and do a bunch in a row that are all the same breed, and that can save a bit of a time. Also, if you're entering in a calf, it actually will calculate the breed composition of the calf based on the sire you've entered and the dam, the combination of the two, it'll figure it out for you. So this doesn't really come into play in those situations. But if it can't find another default, this is where it'll get that. And that's the same for color, horn status, the owner, and all of these other fields that are here. So that can be useful. I want to spend just a moment on calving year. Herdley has the idea where not only can a birth date be saved with every calf, but also the calving year. And this helps out a lot when we're trying to create different dashboards and reports and graphs, because we want to lump all the calves that were born in a calving year together, even if the calendar year wasn't exactly the same. So for example, let's say your calving year starts January 1st, goes through, say, March 15th, but you had a cow calve early, December 31st. Well, if she still has the same calving year as all the other calves, then they're still going to be lumped together in the same calving year for statistical purposes, which is really important. And this is where that calving year will come from each time a new calf is created. And so it's important to remember before the calving season starts to go back into your settings and update this calving year. And if you do that, then you'll be good. And it'll have the correct calving year for all your new calves. So just something to keep in mind. Once a year, come in and update that calving year. Okay, let's go to the next section, which is optional fields. Quite a few of the fields in Herdley are what we consider optional fields. They're fields that we know some people need, but a lot of people don't. And so here you can choose whether or not these fields will show. So if you remember, in fact, I'll just show it again. If I go back to the animals list, and if I choose to create a new animal, you'll see that in the identification section, for example, there's a lot of different ways that you can identify this animal. And some people are happy to use all of those, but a lot of people just want a few and don't want all these other fields to be in their way. So that's where this comes into play. If we want, we could turn off all of these, and then maybe all we really care about is, let's say, the tag color, alternate, RFID tag, brand and brand location, and maybe that's all we care about in identification. In the attributes, there's several here that we could add. I'll just add those in because maybe I actually want to keep track of most of those. And calving season, maybe I don't really care about that because I only have one real calving season a year, so that's fine. And maybe I don't do any creep feeding, so I'm going to leave that one off as well. Now if I save this, and if I go back and choose new animal here in the animal list, you'll see that the identification section has shrunk. Now it just has the fields we're interested in. So this is one way of customizing Herdley. This change will happen both here and on any of the devices you're syncing to, and makes things a lot cleaner and quicker and easier to see. All right, let's open up the RANT settings again. And we're getting pretty close to the end of this window. The next one is your CCIA section. If you're going to be having Herdly automatically create CCIA events for you, and we recommend that you do if you're in Canada, you'll first need to enter in your account information. And this is important so that Herdly can, first of all, create the events, but then also be able to submit them automatically to CCIA in the background. Herdly tries really hard to make it so that CCIA events are submitted and taken care of completely automatically. If you have this checkbox, automatically create CCIA events, turned on, then in the background, every time you add a new calf, as long as there's an RFID tag, of course, or if you move animals from one location to another, assuming they have different premise IDs, several other things where if you do that, Herdly just automatically takes care of that. You don't have to worry about uploading or anything like that. And so what you would do is you enter in your account ID and your username and password here. I'm not going to give an example of this, so you'll have to imagine that by yourself. We haven't done locations yet, but after you enter your locations, each of them will show up here, and you can attach your premise ID to each one of those. Now, there's a few things that are important to know about getting your CCIA account set up correctly in Herdly. Entering the account ID and username and password in your premise information is very simple and straightforward. However, there's an additional step that needs to be taken care of so that Herdly can move these events to CCIA on your behalf. That is explained here. Basically, you need to ask CCIA to turn on the WS event submission and the WS birth date report security options for your account. There's a couple ways of doing that. You can email the email here, or you can phone, give them your account information, tell them that you're using Herdly and that you want these turned on. And generally, they get it turned on within about 24 hours. We actually have a button down here which you can click, and if I had information filled in here, I could click it, and it would automatically create an email in your default email client with all the information needed, so you can just hit send, and it'll go to them, and they can move forward with that. Once they have it turned on, you'll get an email back to you letting you know that, and then you can test it. Once you have that information in, just click Test Account. If I do it right now, it's just going to tell me I haven't entered my account information. But if I had, it would let me know if it was working yet or not. And keep in mind that it'll tell you your username and password aren't correct, even if these security options haven't been turned on yet as well. So it's a little bit of a few steps there, but well worth it once it gets up and running. Now to the last section. This is the exposure dates. You don't actually need to use this section. Seem to be getting a dry throat here. When Herdly's trying to create different graphs, for example, the calving distribution graphs in the dashboards and other similar places, in order for it to know what your calving season looks like, it needs to know when the first calving date is for the year. And it could find that out in a couple of ways, and in fact, it does try and find out if it can. For example, it could look at the first calf that was born within that calving year, and then assume that whatever date that was, let's say it was February 1st, then it could say, okay, February 1st is the beginning of the first calving cycle, and then every 21 days after that is another calving cycle, and it could figure that out just fine. The problem could be if you had, maybe you had a calf that was just born really early, you know, a neighbor's bull got in or something and it was born early, or maybe you bought a handful of animals that calved early for some reason, but you didn't really want to count that as part of your real calving year in your statistics. Another way that Hurley could look at is it could go back and look at the year before and say, okay, when was the first exposure date? And then based on the first exposure date, it could add, 283 days to find when the first calving date should be, and then create the cycles from there. But that has a similar problem. Maybe there was, an exposure that was before your real, when you really wanted to put the bulls out. Again, neighbor's bull got in or something like that. And so this screen allows you to kind of override and tell Hurley, you know what, on this year, I want my exposure date to be X. And then all the calculations will be based on that. So let's just add an example here. I'll click the plus button. This is based on exposures, not first calving, so you have to go back a year. So let's go back to 2018. And if you're keeping track of your heifers' calving cycles and the main herd separately, then you need to enter in both dates. If you're not keeping track of them separately, then just enter in the main herd date. But let's say, for example, our heifers, maybe they were exposed, I don't know, we'll just say June 1st, 2018, and maybe the main herd was, I don't know, say July 1st, 2018. And then you could add each year, once you know what your exposure dates are, you can add them here. You don't actually need to enter one for every year. If you don't have a year that Hurley needs information for when it's creating its graphs, it'll go through the process I described earlier, where it basically looks for an exposure date or a first calving date and bases all of its information on that. But if you do have something entered in here, it will take this over whatever Hurley could come up with on its own. And that way you can control your calving cycles more accurately. Okay, that takes care of the ranch settings window. You can see that you can save it as you go along and go back and make changes as we've been doing. All right, let me just check to see if there's any questions to answer. Looks like we're doing good so far. Okay, that's the main setup, but there are a few other things that need to be taken care of in order to fully set up your ranch. And these are things that can happen over time. One of them is to add more users. And so we're going to do that by clicking Setup and going down to Users, which will open up the Users window. You can see so far there's only one user, that's me. This user account was created when we first created a ranch at the beginning of the webinar. And there's, if I were to double click, I can see my information. There's my username. I could change the password if I needed. I could type in my contact name. Notice that I'm an administrator. I'm not archived. And there's some preferences specific to this user. There's some email options specific to this user. You can choose whether or not to receive certain kinds of emails from us. And then probably most importantly, there's a list of permissions. So an admin user is always allowed to do everything. But a non-admin user, you can go through and uncheck things that you don't want them to do. So for example, maybe you don't want this person to ever be able to delete an animal. Or maybe you don't want them to be able to edit an attribute history. Now because this is an admin, I'll leave those on. But there's quite a few options here that you can go through to set up those permissions. So let me cancel this and let's create a new user. Now it's important to, for every real person associated with your ranch, it's important for them to all have their own user account with your ranch. And that way, again, with the permissions, that's important to make sure people aren't able to do things that maybe they haven't been trained to do that could be dangerous to the data. Also, it helps keep track of who made what changes and those kinds of things. So to create a new user, it's simple. You just click the plus button down here, and then you would enter in their information. So maybe This is Levi. I'll just keep a real easy password for the sake of the demo. We'll do 0000, but I don't recommend that in real life. So type in a contact name and email and a phone number. And just like the ranch needing to have a recovery email and phone number, each user needs to have one. So if a particular user loses their ability to get into Herdly, they've forgotten their password or something, we would need to verify that they are who they say they are based on this. I already showed you the preferences and permissions, so we'll leave it at that. I'll click Save, and now we can see Levi is here. And so if Levi is ready, maybe he has a phone, you could give him the information he needed on his phone, and he'd be able to go ahead and log in and then start working with the data. I'd like to show two more things with users that I think are important to know. First of all, if you have somebody who leaves, maybe you have an employee and now they're leaving, there's a couple of things that you'll want to do. First of all, go to the users list like we have here, double click that user. We'll pretend that Levi is the one who's leaving. And you want to archive that person. So you click Archive, click Save, and now you can see they're gone from the list. Now it doesn't mean he's actually not there. Herdly will still remember the things that that user did and show that to them, but they aren't in the main list, and more importantly, they won't be able to log in to see your data anymore. Now down here in the bottom of the window, if I click the Archive button, it will temporarily show me the archived people. So if that person came back and started working on your ranch again, you could actually just go back in, show the archived people, double click his name, say he's no longer archived, and save that, and he now shows up here. The other thing I'd like to show is what you can do either the first time you're trying to get an employee or a family member set up using Herdly with their own device, or if somebody forgets their password, and maybe you don't even know their password, you can't give them the password, but you need them to get in so they can change their password and go from there. What you can do is you can create a temporary login code. So I'll show you how that works. I'm going to pretend that I'm the one that lost my password. So somebody else who has access to the screen can go in here and select my name, and then they can click this button here, Create Temporary Login Code. I click that, and it gives me this code right here, which I need to write down so I don't forget it here in a second. And this code is active for 1 hour. And the person who's going to log in will need your ranch ID. Remember, I mentioned that before. You need to keep that somewhere where you can remember it. And it shows up in this screen as well because you'll need it. And you'll need to know this temporary code. Okay, so that's been created. Now what I'm going to do to show how this works is I'm actually going to log out. And now I'm back at the screen. It could be kind of similar on a phone or another computer. And I want to log in as myself, but I've forgotten the password. So someone's given me the temporary code. I can click Temporary Code. And in this case, it already knows my ranch ID, so I don't need to type it in. There are other cases where you need to type in the ranch ID as well. So I'm just going to type in that temporary code that was given and log in. And there we go. I'm logged back in, and it remembers who I am. If I go back to Setup and open up the Users window, then we can see that that temporary code isn't showing up anymore. That's because it was used. So really important to set up a different user for each real person who's going to be using the account. And keep in mind that if you want, you can have a veterinarian or nutritionist or someone else who's consulting for you. You can set up a user account for them if you'd like and give them access to your herd data. Sometimes that makes things a lot easier for them and a great way for them to interact with your data and look for patterns and other things. They can have Herdly on their computer, and work it so they can see your stuff too. All right, let's close that. Now I just want to show devices for a moment. If I click on Setup, go down to Devices, this is going to show each computer or phone or anything that's connected to your ranch account. And usually this isn't very important. You can double click this field here to give it a new nickname. But the reason I really wanted to show this to you is going back to the idea of an employee who's leaving and you need to archive them. You don't want them to access the data. That's step number one. But if you really want to make sure they can't get the data, or maybe you have a phone that was stolen, for example, and you don't want anyone to be able to get the data on there, what you can do is find that device in this list and select it. And then you could say that you want to send a wipe device, send wipe request. And what that does is it asks Herdly to send a message to that version of Herdly so that whenever it gets that message, it'll actually clear all the data out of Herdly and make it so that person can't see anything again. So just a handy way to keep things really secure with your ranch. Okay, I'm going to close this window. And let's go back to the main part of the setup again. Let's look at our locations. Locations are important in Herdly. It allows you to be able to move animals around, keep track of where they are, and work with just certain groups of animals based on location. And so what you'd want to do here is create a location for each of the locations that you have, each of your fields, or maybe even pens. Basically, a location would be a physical place where your cows can be without being able to go anywhere else. So let's just add a few of them. Maybe we'll call this one quarter 8. And there's a couple of options here. You can call it either a pasture or a pen. Herdly doesn't really care. This is just for your own information. Maybe I'll call this one section 11. And notice I don't need to save. Each time I click the plus button or if I close the window, it's just automatically saving this in the background. So now I have a couple locations. Maybe I'll just do one more. Call this one the bullpen. And so you can see all of them on the side. If I had one of these locations that I wasn't going to use again in the future, if I'd never used it for anything, I could select it and delete it by clicking the minus button. But if I had used it, I want to keep that history. Herdly wants to remember that, maybe 3 years ago, those cows were in section 11. The better thing to do is to archive it, which you can do by clicking the archive checkbox next to that location. That way it still exists, but it won't show up in your list when you're trying to move cows. It just exists for historical purposes. And I think that's about it for locations. We close that and go back up to setup, and we'll go down to contacts. This window works very similarly to the locations. To add a contact, you click the plus button, then you would enter in the information. You could enter in as much or as little as you want. The only thing that's really required is the name. And you'd want to enter in contacts like, veterinarian or maybe other owners of cattle. If the cows on your ranch are owned by multiple people, you'd want to enter them in. People that you purchase animals from or sell to. There's several places in Herdly where you'll be able to choose a contact for one of those purposes. And so they just need to be entered in here. But you don't need to enter all your contacts, just the ones you're interested in. Okay, probably not much to show there. You can archive contacts in the same way if you don't want them showing up on lists anymore. All right, let's close this and we'll move on to products is another one. I'm not actually going to show that any more than just showing the screen. because it isn't something that's used in Herdley yet. It's just there for a future feature that will be coming. So I'm going to close that. Go back to setup and go down to drugs. Now, as you remember, we actually set up which drugs we were interested in back in the ranch settings window. And those would be the drugs that would show up here. I actually left them all checked, and so we have a lot of drugs showing up here. The purpose of this window is to change your pricing for your drugs. So when there's a drug event, then Herdley keeps track of how many units of that drug you gave the animal during vaccination or treatment or whatever was going on. And it will also look up and see the amount of dollars that were used. And the way it does that is by looking up the latest pricing, which comes from this window. And it's pretty simple. You just select the drug you're interested in. You enter in a price per unit. And I have no idea what this drug is worth, but let's say it was 50 cents a cc. I could enter in 50 cents there, and then I'm good. Now, as you know, a lot of times drugs are purchased in bottles, and you just know the price of the bottle. And Herdley can help you out there by doing some math. If you use the pricing calculator down here, just tell it how many units are in the bottle. So, I don't know, say it was a 500 ml bottle, and say the bottle was $23.75. You type those two in and click Set Price, and then the price per unit is automatically set up there and put in there as well. So this lets you keep track of your pricing and lets Herdley associate that pricing with drug events. If you're trying to find the name of a drug, you can use the filter button at the top here. And in addition to that, we're currently looking at just the ranch used ones. In other words, the ones that we checked that we typically use in the ranch settings window. But we could also look at any of these other groups of drugs and set the pricing for them as well. Okay, so that's the drugs window. I close that, click Bound Setup again. And now we come to the last item of setup, and that is the groups. Groups are a really important concept in Herdley. Herdley tries to make it easy to work with groups of animals really easy in natural ways as much as possible. So for example, I'm just going to put groups off to the side for a moment and come back here and open the animals list. We don't have any animals in here now, but if I were to click on the filter button, I have several ways of just getting a particular group of animals to do something with, maybe to apply a vaccination to all of them or a preg check to all of them or something like that. And I can do that, for example, by location. I could say, okay, I want to look at all of the animals that are in quarter 8 and that are cows. And then when I apply the filter, I would only be looking at those animals. And there's lots of ways that Herdley gives for you to do that. But no matter what, there's always going to be some groups of cattle that you want to work with that Herdley just can't see that they're a particular group. And that's where these groups come into play. And so you can create a group. This is where just the name of the group is created. So as an example, let's say, let's say possible replacement heifers. That might be a group. And so the idea there would be, maybe you're out in the field and you're looking at I don't know, let's say a 4-month-old calf, and you're thinking, she looks pretty good. I want to keep that in mind, that maybe I'll keep her back as a heifer, a replacement heifer later on when I wean. And so you'd want to add her to that group. And then at weaning time, you could just bring up your group of possible replacement heifers and then narrow down the search from there and just work with that group. You can create a note here to help you remember what that group's about. And you can create as many groups as you want. We could create some more here if we wanted, but I'll just leave this as it is now. Now, note that we've created the group itself, but there aren't any animals in the group. And the way to do that is to actually work with the animals themselves. So to do that, we actually need to create a few animals. So let's go back to our animal list window, and it's time for us to create a few animals. When you first create a herdly ranch, of course, there aren't any animals in it, and so you'll need to get your current herd in. And the mechanism is the same, but there's two sort of procedures for doing that. One that some customers like doing is to simply sit down and enter in all of their herd, at once, or maybe over a few days, a few minutes here and there as they go. But basically, they want to get everything into Herdly so that once they go out in the field, all the information's there and they can just move on from there. And that's a perfectly legitimate way to do it. Other customers prefer to enter in animals as they go. So maybe there's a new calf that's born and they see, oh, I haven't entered in the cow yet. So instead of recording the calf first, they go and create a new cow, and then they create the calf. So they're basically building their herd up over time. And that's also a perfectly legitimate way to do it. A lot of this will be done on the phone, which is very similar to the way we're going to do it here. But I'll just show you how to do it on a computer. So you've already seen me go to this Actions button quite a few times. And when I click it, because there's nothing else in Herdly right now, the only option is New Animal. So let's go ahead and create a new animal. One thing that's nice about Herdly is the only thing you actually have to enter for an animal is a tag number. It doesn't even have to be unique, but you do have to type in a tag number. So let's type in, we'll just say 100D. If I wanted, I could give it a tag color and I could give it more information. The status down here is important. We're saying that this is a current animal. She actually is alive and exists in our herd on the ranch right now. Yes, this is a female, so we'll leave it that. And the classification would be cow. And we're going to say she's in our breeding herd. And let's say she's pregnant. Maybe we just bought some pregnant cows. Now, if you knew the birth date, you could enter in her birth date and color and breed and some of this other information. Just a note about birth date. A lot of times you're not going to know the birth date of a cow, especially if it's purchased. But if you even know just the year, sometimes you can get that from the tag letter or for some other information. Say you got an auction sale, a lot of times they'll know the age. Even if you just standardize on, say, March 1st, but then whatever the year is, let's say 2015, just by knowing at least the year portion, even if the month and the day are just an estimate, allows Herdly to do a lot of additional calculations that are really helpful when it's doing the dashboard. So wherever possible, try and enter in at least an estimated birth date. Now there's more things we could add in down here. We could say, okay, she's going right into Q8. The arrival date defaults to today, and that's fine. Well, if you know your weight, that's helpful for some other calculations. Of course, a lot of time that won't be known, but you might be able to estimate it. Let's just say she's 1,200 pounds. There's a few other fields related to the arrival here. You could say where she was raised at, who she was purchased from. You remember we only have a couple of contacts in our database right now, so we'll just say she's purchased from Nicole Smith. You could enter in the price and the arrival note. And if she's going to be going into your breeding pool, then you should enter in this information too. I'm just going to hit T, which gives me today's date. And that's good enough. Now we know she's in the breeding pool, and Herdly can do things as a result of that. If it knows she's in your breeding pool, then Herdly will include her in specific statistics that have to do with just the cows that are in your breeding pool right now. So make sure you enter that in as well. We could change the ownership and even add a photo, but that's good enough. We're just going to go ahead and hit save there. Oh, I think I saw a question just come in. Is there a way to add a photograph? Oh, yes. And you saw how to do that, so great. On the computer, when you're adding a photograph, let me just add another cow here. I'll click New Animal. And let's just do 105E. And I'm not going to enter in most of this information. I'll just leave it as is. But I want to get back down to the photo. On a computer, all you can do is replace a picture by choosing a picture that's on your file system. I don't have one handy. I wish now I would have thought to get a file ready so you could see that. On the phone, however, you can actually take a picture. So if you're entering this information live with the cattle there, you can take a picture of it right there, and that will be stored with that cow. Okay, so we could continue. I can save that one, and you can see that the animals keep getting added here as we add those animals. Now, we were talking about groups a moment ago, and I just want to show you how you actually get animals into a group. It's somewhat similar on the phone as well. Let's say we wanted to add this cow to one of our groups. And so what I would do is I'd go select her here. I'd go up to Actions, and I would go down to Add to Group. And that brings in the Add to Group action. I can choose my group. Now I only have one group, and I have to admit that this doesn't really make sense for a cow, but in order to show you, well, I can actually add a group on the fly. Let's do that. So new group, and I'm going to call this, oh, it's a good example. How about possible sick animals? So she's one I just want to keep an eye on. I noticed maybe a bit of a limp or something. Keeps a way of grouping them together. So now I have possible sick animals. I can save it. And now she's in that group. And if I were to go to filter, and if I were to go down to the group filter and say, okay, I want to see everything that is a possible sick animal or in that group, when I apply the filter, you'll see that just she is showing in the list. Now let me go back to the filter and remove that. So we're seeing all the animals again. By the way, we're going to have some webinars in the future that go into more detail on how filters work. So that's why I'm going over it quite briefly here. Now, if I were to go back to our setup and open up those groups again, you see if I choose possible sick animals, it knows that one animal is in that group. So you can also see it from here. But I just want to show that because I just want to show that the idea of creating a group, or at least the group name, is to be done in this window. And it's a little bit separate from actually adding animals to a group. And that's done just by selecting the animals. And of course, I can add multiple ones at the same time. So let's say I select both animals, chose Actions, and went down here to Add to Group. And we'll just choose possible sick animals again, and I'll save that. Now both of those animals are in that group. And if we were to, let me just click off and back on again to refresh it, you can see there's now 2 animals in that group. So again, groups can be very powerful. It's a way of you customizing Herdly to be able to work with groups of animals in ways that aren't naturally available in Herdly. And groups can stay around for a long time. You can have as many groups as you want. You can create a group just for a day if you needed to. Maybe you're doing a vaccination or some kind of shoot side job and you want to just group all the animals that came through in a group and then later on do something with that group. It's not a problem. Just add groups as you need to. Okay. We are winding down now. Let me show a couple of things related to documentation, and then I'll move into questions, and then we'll be pretty much done. So I just first of all want to show that every window has a big help button somewhere in that window. On the mobile devices, the help button will be at the top of every screen. And if you click that, you're going to have, oh, it went to my other screen. One moment and I'll bring it over here. What it'll do is open up a website to the thing that has to do with that help. Let me see if I can find a better example. Now, let's open up the CCA Events window, which we didn't go over today. We'll do that in a future webinar as well. But if I find the help button and click it, then you'll see that it goes right to the CCA Events part of our documentation. And we've tried really hard to be careful in documenting everything so it's easy to find things. So keep that in mind. Now, speaking of the documentation, if you go to our website, which you can see here, but I'll just enter it in so you can see how to get there. It's simply herdley.ca. That will bring you to the website. I want to show two things here. First of all, we do have a webinars link. If I were to click on that, you can see the webinar that was given a couple of weeks ago, and you're free to go ahead and watch it. And the webinar that's happening tonight, as I mentioned before, is being recorded and will show up here in the next day or two, so you can watch that as well. More importantly, I want to show you the support part of our website. This is what that looks like. You can search our documentation. We have it categorized into several sections. And at the bottom, if you still can't find the help you need, you can always request support by clicking the request support button, filling in a few details. We try and get back within 24 hours as much as possible. Most of the documentation, if I click on new animal, for example, has a video that shows how to use that on both the computer and the phone, as well as more information here. Specifically though, I want to show that for tonight, there's two pieces I wanted to show. Yes, the getting started section has details on all of the things we covered. So locations, contacts, ranch setup window, users, and even more is all located in this area. So if there's something that you missed, you'll probably find it in here. In addition, at the bottom, we have this one called Quick Start Guides. And if you click on that, you'll see that some of the real basic information, like getting an existing animal to herdley or purchasing an animal, it just quickly shows you the steps you need to take to do that in herdley, with links to more documentation on each one of those. And finally, there are lots of other pieces that are helpful, data entry techniques, and some of these other ones go over some general details that will help you with herdley as you move forward. Okay, now let me just pause here for one moment. Get back to the slides. All right, that's the end of the demo. So now, questions. Let me just see if there's any questions. Okay, oh, I see one I missed a little bit earlier. Let's see, I'm typing in the exposure date, June 1st, and it comes up as a different date. I can't seem to adjust it. Let me just show you how to enter in dates. This is something we'll cover more in a webinar that shows tips and tricks for entering in dates. But let me just go back to herdley. And let's go to our animal list. Actually, I'll go to, if I click on Tools in the menu bar and choose Gestation Calculator, it has a date right in the center. So with herdley, you can't enter a date, as you mentioned, like June 1st. It's not going to recognize that date. Instead, you need to think of it in numerical portions. So for example, if I was going to enter in March 15th of this year, I could go 3 space 15 space 19. That would be one way of doing it. Part of this format will depend on how your computer system is set up. So I have my computer set up to go month first, then day, then year. If yours is different, you may have to enter it in a little bit differently. So that's one way of entering in a date, but there are some other ways. So for example, if I only typed in a 7 and then just tabbed out, it's going to automatically assume May, because it's May right now, in 2019. So that's a lot faster way of entering in a date. Or if I typed in 3 space, I don't have to use spaces, I can use other characters like a dot, 3.15, it's going to assume 2019 because it's the current year. So when I tab out, it goes March 15th, 2019. Another thing you can do, there's a whole bunch of shortcuts. I'll just give you a couple of quick examples right now. T always takes you to today, or the plus button will go forward a day. The minus button goes minus a day. And there's several others that are in the documentation. So hopefully that helps you with entering in dates. Hopefully that answers your question. Let me see if there's any others. Yes, there's another one. Is there a way to view one cow's family, her offspring, as well as her parents, grandparents, great-grandparents? That's a great question, Lisa. Let me show you how to do that. It's actually in two places. Now, I won't have a good example here because we just have two cows that are related. But I'll show you how to see the offspring first. And the way to do that is to choose the cow that you want to see the offspring for, go to Child List, and say Show Calves. And once you've chosen Show Calves, it brings up, it sort of splits the window. So on the top is the cow, and on the bottom will be the calves. Now, maybe it's better if we quickly add a calf. So I'm going to say we're going to add a calf. I'm going to go to Actions, once they're selected, choose New Calf. And we could type in a bunch of information. It defaults to today, and remember it adds the tag the way I mentioned before. We're just going to leave the rest as is. I'm just going to click Save, just in the interest of time. And you'll see that now we can see the one calf that she has down here. And if she had several calves, we could see several calves down here. And you can see all the information about those calves. So that would be how you see the offspring. I'm just going to close that child view, child list. If I want to see her pedigree, then I want to look in her history. And so there's two ways of doing that. I can go to Actions and go down to Animal History, or I can just double click the cow. So if I double click her, it brings up all of her information in the history. And if I scroll down a little ways, there's a pedigree here. Now, of course, I don't actually have any pedigree on this particular cow, but if I did, then it would show up here with their tag numbers, and I'd actually be able to click on any one of them to see, maybe the sire's information or the grandsire's information, and so on. So, thanks for that question, Lisa. Hopefully that helped. Okay. And Lisa says she likes the visual tree. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Any other questions? I don't see any more. So maybe it's time to end the webinar. If anyone else has a last-minute question, feel free to ask it while I wrap things up, and I'll try and answer it really quickly. But first of all, I'd like to remind you that we did have a webinar recorded a couple of weeks ago. You can still watch on our website. This one will be available in a day or two, and we'll also be sending out invitations again in the next couple of days for one that we have planned in 2 weeks from now, and then there'll probably be another one after that as well. We're just trying to work our way through each aspect of herdly in this format. We are very open to ideas for future webinars. This is new for us, and we're hoping that this is helpful. If you do have ideas that you'd like to have us cover, please use that support button in the request support button on our support page and send us the ideas, and we'd be happy to try and accommodate that. Finally, just want to tell you thank you for your interest in herdly. We appreciate that, and we appreciate those that are using herdly. We like to encourage you to let your neighbors know about it. We're anxious to let as many people know about herdly as possible. Let me just check the questions one more time, and it looks like we've answered all of them. So with that, thank you for your time. We appreciate that, and we'll sign off.